Welcome everyone to Kolkata, India, where Levon Aronian on your screen takes on Magnus Carlsen. What a clash this is going to be between two of the finest players in the world. Levon has the white pieces, Magnus has black. It was said that if there's someone who can pose Magnus a lot of problems in the world of chess, that's Levon Aronian. In the background, you can also see Jan Nepomniachtchi there. Both the players take off their jackets, put it behind them on their chairs, and we are off to go. It's 5 minutes plus 3 seconds. Here, c4 by Levon Aronian, the English opening. On the board, Magnus Carlsen plays g6. Knight comes out to c3. And now Magnus plays the symmetrical variation with c5. Both the players blitz out their opening moves. We have a very symmetrical position on the board. d3 played, and now Magnus has to decide what he does. He also plays d6, queen d2, slightly weird move. You want to play b3, bishop b2, and Magnus instantly blitz out his move e5. He is well aware of this opening. b3 played by Levon, knight comes out to e7, bishop b2. Now Magnus must decide whether he wants to castle here, because sometimes when you castle too soon, h4, h5 can be an idea. So he puts his bishop on e6, developing it. And Levon now has to decide whether he wants to put his knight on f3. He goes knight d5. And he tells Magnus, you can't take this knight, because if you take it, I'll take back with the pawn, forking two of your pieces. So Magnus just brings his queen up, and maybe at some point would love to go to h3 if the knight is not standing here. That being said, Levon Aronian has to decide how is he developing the knight on g1. He cannot play his knight to f3, because then he simply loses a pawn, and that's not what you want. So that's the reason why he's taking his time. He plays e3, and the point is you want to get your knight to e2. Now Magnus is happy to castle. He's not so afraid of h4, although it's a very valid move. Levon goes knight e2, and Magnus, who has built up a solid time lead, now goes bishop h3. Notice how important this move is, because when Levon captures here, all the light squares in white's camp become weak, and he takes it. Queen takes. Now the queen can come in here, but Levon says, my knight is well placed in the center, supported by another knight. So I'm actually very happy. Now notice what Magnus Carlsen is going to do on the next move. It is an absolutely brilliant move here. Rook a b8. And you might think, what's the big point about this move? Well, the idea is to take here. And once you take with the knight, I'm going to push my pawn to b5 and activate my rook down the b5. This is a small little move with some major ramifications here. So Levon has to be careful. Firstly, he cannot castle because the queen looks here. He wants to long castle, but then maybe his king is not the safest on the queen side. What should he do? Should he take on e7? Well, he decides to long castle. That is daredevil chess now. Magnus simply chops it off. Look at the quick decision making. If you take with the pawn, there is knight b4, attacking here. If you play a3, then later I go b5, b4. So he takes with the knight on d5, and Magnus instantly plays b5. Look at the usefulness of the rook on the b8 square. Levon is not one to sit there and just take it easy. Magnus pushes his pawn. He's like, I don't think your attack is very strong, Levon. I am coming at you with a4, b5. Look at this position. Levon Aronian in big pressure, but with the pawn on f4, he has to somehow figure out some way to create counterplay. Maybe one move is to take, but then Magnus can take with the pawn or even with the knight. Both look fine. The other idea, which is very tempting, is to take on b5. But then after rook takes b5, the rook is activated. You can double down the b file, push your pawn to a4. So maybe not take the pawn. One plan is rook hf1 exactly, and your idea is to play f5 to open up the black king, and that is exactly what Levon Aronian wants to do. But it is not an easy plan to push f5, because then black can simply take it. It would be a pawn sacrifice. Magnus Carlsen pushes his pawn to a4. Look at the clock on the time. He has 4 minutes 22 seconds. Levon Aronian, just 2 minutes 40 seconds. Magnus has been taking some lightning quick decisions here. Now his idea is to take on b3, take on c4, open up the rook here, maybe switch his other rook to the a file and get in and checkmate the white king. That's what he wants. Levon has to find what is his way of creating counterplay here. Imagine that Levon plays the move f5 and then Magnus takes it. Now in such a position, Magnus may switch his queen and attack here, and that's what Levon does. He pushes his pawn to f5 and tells Magnus, if you take here, I will switch my queen and maybe get some counterplay. So for Magnus, it's a question whether to take the pawn. Magnus says, no thank you, I'm taking on b3. Very quick to make decisions here. This game is also a big testament to Magnus's quick decision making. He's really good at it. Even though there are many possibilities, he's very quick to take his calls. Pawn takes pawn, and now he takes on c4. Levon takes the pawn back. But look at this open file. But one threat that is coming into the position is f6. And you have to be careful about it. Because then the knight can jump to e7 with a check. And if you take, then the pawn can move to the 7th rank. So Magnus is finally taking some time. He has 3 minutes 50 seconds, a lot of time on the clock. And he must decide whether he wants to take the pawn here or he wants to continue his play on the queen side. Again, a decision is to be made. If you take gf5, then queen f2, and you have to worry about this pawn. Magnus says, I don't want to worry. He brings his rook in. Levon pushes the pawn. The bishop is attacked. Of course, you don't want to put your bishop back on h8. That would be a very sad square. So he goes to h6. And now look at this pin here. The e3 pawn is pinned, which means that the knight can jump to d4 and you can't take it because then the queen would be attacked. That's a very, very smart thing that Magnus has done here. Levon down to 1 minute 40 seconds. Magnus's plan is clear. He wants to bring his rook here. If Levon gives a check, you take it. Pawn takes, play your rook to e8, then this pawn is hanging. You can also switch your rook to b8. Queen will go back and round up this pawn. So really, it's not a big threat, this check on e7. But where does Levon create his counterplay then? If this check doesn't work, what else to do? He's down to 1 minute 13 seconds, clearly facing the pressure there. But look at Magnus's posture. It feels like Magnus is ready for his move. There is something about Magnus in this game that he is not ready to think much and actually is taking all of Levon's time to make his decisions. But now he's looking up at the screen, back to the board with complete focus. 52 seconds left for Levon Aronian. He brings his king up and Magnus instantly brings his rook. Bishop moves up. Okay, what Levon essentially is saying is that next move I want to bring my rook and I want to exchange off the pieces. Can you stop that, Magnus? That is an important question because that's why he brought his king up and the bishop here. So Magnus is taking his time. He's down to 3 minutes 12 seconds and queen d7. What an accurate move, because now if you play rook b1, then there is knight d4 check, and when you take on b4, then comes queen a4. Look at that deep calculation by Magnus Carlsen. He saw it and the white king is absolutely busted. So that's the reason why here he goes rook a1, but now Magnus jumps in with the check. You can't take with the pawn because the queen is hanging. So you must take it with the bishop, or else you can move your king away. But that would be suicidal because then the rook jumps in and it's a mate. So what do? Levon must decide here. He must take the knight. He has 17 seconds left. Take the knight with the bishop. He takes it. But Magnus now chops it off with the pawn with pressure here. What to do? Very bad position. Also threatening check. He moves his rook to a2, stopping that. Now one idea is to take on e3, but Magnus can also triple down the b file with queen b7. You can see that how Levon's attack has not at all started. Magnus still has full 3 minutes on the clock. Plays queen b7. Fantastic move, threatening a check here. Also all sorts of tricks can happen now with the queen. Entering their queen c1 played by Levon Aronian, and Magnus quick to sacrifice his rook. Knight takes e3. queen moves into b3. What speedy calculations! If king d2, you simply take the knight. Next move, take the rook. And Levon actually understands that the position is gone. He resigns. Magnus Carlsen wins with 2 minutes 54 seconds left.